Check, check. Wiki, wiki. It's time for me to get sicky, talking over this non-beat, ready to talk about photography. First time I ever shot a wedding. Won't be a time I'll quickly be forgetting, because I made a ton of mistakes. But I was able to rectify them, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. If you didn't already glean from that fantastic intro, last week I shot my first wedding. I'm an amateur photographer, which means I don't have a great deal of expensive equipment. I don't have a great deal of experience when it comes to event shooting. But I got asked by a friend of mine to shoot his and his fiance's wedding, and I thought I better take the plunge, even though it was really nerve-wracking, so that I could see how I did, what I could improve on, and hopefully the main point of it was to capture the day for the bride and groom so they could have memories to look back on in the future. Firstly, I'll talk about my strategy. As I said, I don't have a ton of expensive equipment. What I do have is my Sony A6000 mirrorless APS-C camera. That comes with a kit lens on it, which is 16mm to 50mm, so you can zoom in and out to zoom in or zoom out. Obviously, the maximum aperture is 3.5, and that's when you're zoomed out to your widest angle. And the minimum aperture is 5.6, which is the most you can get when you're zoomed all the way in. However, I also have my 35mm Sony prime lens with a 1.8 aperture and my 60mm Sigma prime lens with a 2.8 aperture. I also took a bunch of other equipment that I didn't end up using, apart from this speed light, which I put on top of the camera to use as an on-camera flash. And that is where the problem started, which I will get into later. So the idea was that I would set my camera settings to 2.8 aperture and then switch between the 35mm and the 60mm, which would hopefully make it easier for editing, because I would have a constant aperture between these two lenses. Even though the 35mm can go to a wider aperture, if I kept it at 2.8, it would make it easier in the editing process. So basically switch between these two lenses based on whether I was closer to the subject or wanted to get a close-up shot, or if I was further away. I also set the camera at a variable ISO, auto ISO, with a maximum of 800, because I'd done some research and read that the Sony A6000 can handle 800 ISO without getting too much noise in the image. And I've done tests before, and I was confident going in with those settings. Knowing what I know about wedding photography, and I've done a little bit of research and spoken to wedding photographers who are very well versed in this style of photography, what you ideally want to walk into a wedding with is more than one, maybe more than two camera bodies, so that if one fails, you know, you've got a backup. The other benefit of taking two camera bodies to a wedding is that you could have one lens on each. So instead of swapping out the lenses, you've got two cameras ready to go. You can just pick up the 35mm on this shoulder, pick up the 60mm on this shoulder, and you've got both focal lengths available to you without having to switch. That was one of the things that I tried to prep for when I did this wedding. I did ask to borrow a friend's camera. Thank you, Chris, if you're watching. It was the same lens system that I was looking for. So Chris had the Sony A5100. I've got the Sony A6000. The idea was to put one lens on each and have them available, but unfortunately when I did borrow Chris's camera, the results that I got from practicing with that method didn't really work out for me, so I abandoned that. Instead, what I did was had a open camera pouch like that with a shoulder strap around the shoulder, and in the moment I was just able to toss the lens that I took off the camera in and pick up the lens that I was replacing it with out and quickly snap in. One thing that was important to me was to get to the venue early so that I could assess the lighting conditions and assess the layout, have a little plan of action of how I was going to move around the room. Turns out that all kind of went to hell. As soon as the bride started walking down the aisle and it was go time, I kind of lost my calm and I panicked a little bit. But it's okay, you know, like I said, it was the first one I've done. When I got to the venue, the lighting inside wasn't great. It wasn't very good. It didn't look appealing, maybe even to the naked eye, but certainly when you're using a camera. I wasn't confident that I could get decent photos without using an additional light. So that's when I decided to put a speed light on top of the camera so that I could flash it off, like so, to add additional light to the photos that I was taking and hopefully get better results. But it turned out that was not a very good idea. I'm not very competent with using basically flash photography. I'm okay if I can use it in situations where I've got a lot of time to set up the shot, change the lighting settings, alter the position of the lighting, etc. When it comes to wedding photography, and bear in mind I've only shot the one, but this is my experience, it's so fast-paced and so you've got to make sure you're getting the shots as they're happening. They don't put the ring on each other's finger. You know, it's not like a it's not like a take 4. I just want to move this light here. It's like a one-time deal. There's only one first kiss. There's only one ring on the finger moment. There's only one walking down the aisle, and you've got to make sure that you capture all that. And basically what I found was deciding to use the speed light as an on-camera flash. I was getting very inconsistent lighting conditions based on whether I was stood up or crouched down or near or far from the subject. And I realized this when I first started shooting when the ceremony was underway, but by that time it was kind of too late to abandon my plan and go for something a bit more off the cuff. The ceremony went fine. It was a beautiful day. It was a COVID wedding, so there was, I think, a maximum of 12 guests, plus the bride and groom was 13, 14. I think they couldn't have gone above 15 in total. I don't know whether I was counted in that or not, but everybody was socially distanced. Everybody was wearing masks. I was wearing a mask, so as I was running around I was getting quite hot and bothered. But obviously there was also the added challenge of trying to get photographs of people when they were socially distanced, had the masks off. You had to try and get photos of everybody's faces during that time. And then obviously when everybody stood up and was moving around, they had the masks on, so they didn't make for the best photos. But that's just a little side note. I still think I was technically unprepared when I went into this. But everything went fine. I got the photos. I took about 800. When I came home then to cull them, as soon as I imported them into iPhoto, which is how I organize my photos, I was incredibly disheartened. Everything looked pink. I think I must have had the white balance settings on the camera just set up incorrectly. Everything looked awful. Everything looked lacking in contrast. The colors were all off. It was atrocious. And I got really disheartened at first. And I instantly thought, ish. I've ruined these guys' day by not capturing anything effectively. I did a little bit of culling that night, but I spoke to Sean, showed her, she agreed the photos didn't look great. But I slept on it, came back to it the next day, and this, I think, is the absolute reason that it is crucial to shoot in RAW. Once I exported the photos that I was going to edit into Lightroom, I was able to change the white balance in post-processing. As soon as I did that, the photos started looking infinitely better. I sort of breathed a sigh of relief. They still weren't incredible, but they were certainly workable now. So I went about editing them, and I spent about a week, I think, in total. Maybe 2 hours a day for a whole week. So what's that? 2, 10, maybe 14 hours across the course of that following week, editing the photos to a level to a standard that I was happy with. Finally uploaded them to my gallery online, sent the gallery and the password to the bride and groom, and again that was a nerve-wracking moment because it was like, this is it, this is the final step, send it over, what do they think? And it turned out they were actually, if they weren't lying, which I really hope they weren't, because I can handle constructive criticism, I really can. But it turns out they were really happy with what I'd captured that day, and they were happy with the edits that I'd done. When I sent the gallery, I did tell them, there were a few things I missed, like I didn't capture the first kiss as well as I could. I didn't have a good angle on it. Not being a wedding photographer, I wasn't 100% sure what cues to follow. I didn't know when the first kiss was coming, essentially. Didn't make the move to a better angle at that point. So I did suggest that maybe when the weather's a bit nicer, when COVID's a bit less of an issue, we could go out and do a couple shoot, and I could capture the images that I feel like I missed in a way that I could actually take my time and get decent photos. I'm much better at doing outdoor natural light photography at the moment than I am with flash photography. The reason that I was able to be invited to shoot this wedding is because I previously shot a Bearded Villains summer barbecue event, which I will talk about in a second. I'll show you the photos of that as well. But yeah, they were happy. I was not necessarily happy, but relieved that I hadn't completely messed it up. So I guess job fairly well done. The main point of it was satisfied. The bride and groom were happy. So now that I've discussed the technical aspect of it, let's talk a little bit about the business aspect of it and the confidence building aspects of doing something like this. So as I said a minute ago, I had previously shot a Bearded Villains summer barbecue event in a nice outdoor location very close to my house, and that was great. It was just a bunch of people milling around. I was able to walk around freely, pick my angles. I had natural lighting, didn't have to worry about a flash, and I was really happy with the results that I got from shooting that day. If you go to my website, I'll put all the links in below. There was some good group shots, I got some good reaction shots of people, I got expressions. That's where I feel more comfortable with photography, is just being able to move around a situation and capture it as I want to. So that was great, but the whole reason that I got invited to do this wedding was because I'd done the Bearded Villains barbecue, because the groom at the wedding was a member or a hopeful wonderful member of the Bearded Villains. If you don't know what the Bearded Villains are, I will also link a video in the description of a podcast I did where I discussed the Bearded Villains. Essentially, it's a group of bearded men. But they do a lot of charity work, and it's kind of like a brotherhood of men supporting men, but also doing good for the wider community. So that's an important aspect, I think, of networking. If you don't put yourself out there to do certain things, you may be missing a lot of leads to do other things. I'm more than happy to go and shoot things like the Bearded Villains barbecue for free. I don't charge for these things. It's just practice. It's practice, getting used to my camera, getting better results, and it leads on to other things. In a nutshell, I'm really glad that I did this first wedding. I think I learned a lot from it, not only in the technical aspect of what equipment I should use and how I should set it up, but also the editing aspects. There were sliders in Lightroom that I've never used before that I was just playing around with just to try and make the images better, and it worked. And it's by doing that we get better at the things that we want to do and get better at. So I think I'm going to leave that there. As an amateur photographer, this isn't advice to people. This is more talking about my experiences and maybe a little bit of advice to people who are just picking up a camera, who think that maybe wedding photography is something that they want to go into, or event photography. Do it. Take the plunge. It is nerve-wracking, and I was very fortunate that this particular wedding was for a friend of mine, and it was in COVID conditions, so there wasn't a whole lot going on. The whole event only lasted 2 hours at the most, so it was kind of like a good practice wedding. I obviously wouldn't say that to a prospective client. Thanks for inviting me to do your wedding. I'm going to use this event to practice so that I can take better photos for other people's weddings. Obviously, that's not the way you want to approach it, but essentially that is what happened. So I'll leave that there. Thank you for watching. If you get anything from this video or this channel in general, there are links in the description underneath. That's it. Thank you for watching. I hope that you got something from this video. You can find my website at www.ollyrosaphoto.com. You can follow me on Instagram at ollyrosaphoto, Twitter at ollyrosser. Again, thank you for watching. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll speak to you next time.